Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are extremely honored to have with us today Professor Jodi Magness. Professor Magness is an archaeologist, an orientalist, and a scholar of religion. Currently, Professor Magness serves as the Kenan Distinguished Professor for Teaching Excellence in Early Judaism at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Professor Magness received her BA in Archaeology and History from the Hebrew University and earned a Ph.D. in Classical Archaeology from the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Magness has participated in scores of different excavations, both in Israel and in Greece. She co-directed the 1995 excavations of the Roman siege at Masada and has been involved in numerous other excavations in Yotvata, in Khirbet, Yattir, and other locations in Israel, which we will probably hear about. And Professor Magness has authored numerous works, including the archaeology of Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls, stone and dung, oil and spit, Jewish daily life in the time of Jesus, the archaeology of the early Islamic settlement in Palestine, and much, much more. And today, we will be discussing Professor Magness's absolutely fascinating Masada, from Jewish revolt to modern myth. This really page-turner was selected as a finalist for the 2019 National Jewish Book Award in the category of history. And we're going to be hearing from Professor Magness all about Masada, which really is very fitting as we're now going into Israel Remembrance Day, to be followed by Israel Independence Day, 75th year. And I think we'll hear how Masada has really had an impact, and the story has an impact on even modern Israel and Jewish history. So, Professor Magness, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction.
Okay. We have to start somewhere, and I know it's sometimes hard to start, but let's start, if we can, please, with King Herod. Who was King Herod, and what were his main accomplishments?
Wow, that is a huge question, so I'll try to answer it succinctly. So Herod was appointed king of Judea by the Romans in the year 40 BCE. He himself was, I hate to use the word, but it is kind of useful, half Jewish. His grandfather had been an Idumean, that is an inhabitant of the district to the south of Judea, when the Hasmoneans forcibly converted that population to Judaism. So Herod was Jewish on his father's side of the family through forced conversion. His mother, by the way, was not Jewish. She was an Nabatean woman, an Arab woman. And so in 40 BCE, Herod was appointed king of Judea by the Romans, and he then ruled until his death in the year 4 BCE. And, you know, in sort of the public imagination, especially sort of the non-Jewish public imagination, the broader sort of public, Herod is probably remembered best, if he's remembered at all, for an episode that is recorded in the New Testament's Gospel of Matthew, where Herod supposedly ordered all boys under the age of 2 in the area of Bethlehem to be put to death because he heard that one of them would be the Messiah. So that story, the massacre of the innocents, has kind of colored the way the broader public has viewed sort of the memory of Herod the Great. In archaeological circles, however, Herod is actually known as and remembered as the greatest single builder in the history of the country. There is no individual who left a greater mark on the archaeological landscape. He built all over the place. He built monumentally. He established whole cities like Caesarea on the coast, also Samaria, Sebaste. And of course, he rebuilt the Jerusalem temple, the Second Temple. So Herod is best remembered among archaeologists for his many building projects, and among them, of course, is Masada. And Masada is part of sort of a series of building projects that Herod conducted on the southeast frontier of his kingdom. On the southeast frontier, so sort of the area, if you go from the Jordan Valley and then down to the area of the Dead Sea, Herod built a series of fortified palaces. The palaces were intended to serve as places where Herod could spend the winter when it got cold in Jerusalem. But more importantly, they were fortified. They were fortresses. And the reason is that Herod lived his life in fear that one day the Jews would rise up in revolt and attempt to assassinate him, to kill him, because he knew that he was not accepted among at least some sectors of the Jewish population as a legitimate king, since he had been appointed by the Romans, an outside power, and was not descended from the line of the Hasmoneans. And so this sort of series of border fortresses or fortified palaces was intended to sort of secure the southeastern frontier of his kingdom. And also a second purpose was that early in Herod's reign, before the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Herod was threatened by Cleopatra's ambitions in Egypt. Cleopatra VII, who of course was involved with Mark Antony down in Egypt, coveted the same territory that Herod had been given to rule, and Herod was threatened by her ambitions. And so those are the reasons that he created this sort of series of fortified palaces on the southeastern frontier of his kingdom. And Masada is simply one of these, and the most famous one, but just one of them. If you go up to the Jordan Valley, there's Alexandrium Sartaba, and then moving down to the area of Jericho, you have Horkania, which is behind Qumran. You have Kypros, which overlooks Herod's winter palace at Jericho. You have Herodium near Bethlehem. On the other side of the Dead Sea is Machaerus. So Masada is just, the most famous in a whole series of these fortified border palaces that, fortified desert palaces that Herod built, which, by the way, many of them, including Masada, were established on the site of former Hasmonean fortified palaces. So anyway, that's really what Herod is probably best known for, at least in archaeological circles, is his, the amazing imprint that he left on the archaeological landscape.
We're quite familiar also with Herodium, which...
Exactly. Herodium, very interestingly, which could be the topic of a whole nother, series for us. Herodium is the only site that Herod named after himself. When Herod built things, he typically named them after other people. So Caesarea, of course, is named in honor of Augustus. But although Herod usually named things that he built after people, he typically named them after other people, not himself. And Herodium is the only one that he named after himself, apparently because he intended it to serve as his final resting place, and therefore as his everlasting memorial. And in my humble opinion, the discovery of Herod's tomb at Herodium, the site of his mausoleum at Herodium, by the late Israeli archaeologist Ehud Netzer in 2007, is the most important archaeological discovery in the country since the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the reason I say that is because we don't have any writings of Herod himself. We have nothing that Herod wrote himself, right? All of our information, our literary information about Herod, comes from other sources, primarily Josephus, who drew himself on other sources, which are hostile to Herod, which present him in a very bad light. And so what's important about the discovery of Herod's tomb at Herodium, in my opinion, is that it gives us a direct window into how Herod wanted to be remembered for posterity. And so I think it's an extremely important discovery.